Welcome to Navigating India. On the 2nd of January 1948, Mahatma Gandhi wrote a letter to an unknown addressee. I quote, "Man today is afraid of man, afraid of his neighbor. How can I then talk about national issues? We deliberately bring suffering on ourselves, deceive ourselves. No one can harm another. In my view, man is himself the cause of his sufferings. This city, which is the metropolis of the country, has the appearance of a dead city. No one trusts anyone. Such peace as one is to be attributed to the fear of police. Why is it that the freedom achieved through non-violence is sought to be sustained by violence? I have been searching in my heart. I find despair there. Maybe it was the will of God that I should witness this day. Now I have to do or die." Stop quote. This letter shows Gandhi's pain and anguish in regards to the violence that engulfed the country after the announcement of Direct Action Day by Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Gandhi's nonviolence came under great challenge in the events that followed and which finally led to partition. The miracle of nonviolence faded and the peace remained transient. Why was it so? What explains the large scale violence? What do these events say about the nature and psychology of communal violence in India? To address these questions and to explain the nature and limits of violence and nonviolence and the unexpected force of nonviolence, today we are in conversation with Manash Firaq Bhattacharjee, who recently wrote the book Gandhi, The End of Nonviolence. Manash, thank you so much for coming on the show. And I want to start this podcast by taking your view about the growing interest in Gandhi today, a man who is both loved and despised in extremes. Can you explain how and why Gandhi remains so central to our imagination and public discourse, and what sets Gandhi's politics apart from those of other prominent figures worldwide?
Thank you so much, Rishwant, for inviting me to this podcast. And you have been doing really good work. I've seen some of your interviews, and I'm really happy to be here talking to you. So yes, what you just said, is so true that Gandhi is this much loved as well as much despised figure, and he's also been a very controversial figure in that sense that there are so many extreme opinions about him across the ideological spectrum in this country, uh, and controversial also in the sense that even when it comes to something like controversy, even there, Gandhi is unique because sometimes the word controversy is, let's say, used for political leaders who have done or said things of a particular nature. Say there would be a communal political leader who would be called controversial because of his communal views or political activities. So you can really brand that idea of something controversial in one color. But Gandhi is controversial in so many different ways that even in terms of controversy, Gandhi becomes this very complicated figure because he is controversial for so many people from so many directions. And so this is the unique thing about Gandhi, that how he could manage to unleash so many different sort of reactions and responses to what he was and what he meant in his politics and in his thought and activity. It is interesting because you see the moment we find Gandhi entering the domain of the anti-colonial struggle, where in fact we all know that how Gandhi's entry into that struggle transforms the struggle into a movement. Gandhi comes and transforms the Congress party's campaign, if I may, against the British Raj into a full-fledged movement. He brings it onto the streets. And because he does that, and he does it in a very particular, Gandhian manner, that that he raises a lot of, rivalries or certain kind of, rivalries around his political activism, because there were people like Jinnah, for instance, who had a very different idea of how to negotiate with the British, which was a very elite gentry sort of idea, fight it in the courts and make our arguments in the courts. So a very sort of a legal sort of a challenge was what he was trying to throw, whereas Gandhi brought in this element of political activism, get people into the streets, and a very, very different sort of thing. But again, because he brought in other aspects like how to go about this movement, in a certain non-violent manner, and terms like satyagraha. So these very, very clear, precise Gandhian ideas, principles, concepts that he introduced to the movement, also sort of forced others to place themselves vis-a-vis all this. Like how do you place yourself? Where do you place yourself vis-a-vis these principles? So all of this, I think, created a lot of debate and a lot of rivalries. And also because Gandhi was somebody who, I think, more than anybody else, he also made the Hindu-Muslim question central. He said from the beginning that, you cannot imagine freedom, independence, without going headlong into addressing the Hindu-Muslim question. Only through negotiating this problem can you really imagine a semblance of freedom. Now, this again created certain kind of reactions, because maybe, those days, even the Hindu-Muslim question was seen through different prisms. Because for the Muslim League, which was formed pretty early in the 1920s, it was seen that as something where, rights between Hindus and Muslims will be negotiated. So they were also pretty much playing within the larger colonial framework or understanding of how, rights of communities have to be addressed and negotiated through a certain kind of legal framework and procedure. Gandhi was not very interested in that approach. For him, again, the way he approached the question of the political movement against the British, he thought there has to be a demonstrable aspect of what this Hindu-Muslim question should be, that people should come together. There has to be, a certain kind of fraternal relation between Hindus and Muslims politically, which will, be visible and demonstrable in the real field of politics. So he conceived of that friendship also, the Hindu-Muslim friendship, in that very movement-like fashion, where friendship will be part of what we are doing with each other right out there in the field of politics. So these sort of, directions that Gandhi was, trying to steer the Indian anti-colonial freedom movement into, these sparked off many debates, and these debates somehow never ever left us, and now they have become very intense. The point is that Gandhi has always been very clear that you cannot talk about or think about something like the Indian nation something like Indian civilization, without getting into the question of the encounter, that you have encountered people, that Hindus as a group, as a community, they have encountered other people, Christians, Muslims, and it is how you sort this encounter out in politics is where you are going to make headway into all your dreams and ambitions of what sort of an Indian nation you want. Now, those people who are antithetical to this fraternal idea of communities coming together to form something, people who have more divisive ideas, let's say, or very uncompromising ideas about how this fraternal relationship should be achieved. Now, they would have problems with Gandhi, and that is the sort of problem which had turned into propaganda against Gandhi even during Gandhi's time, and that propaganda has refused to ebb. That propaganda has followed us till here, and it is that propaganda that we are constantly having to deal with, because not only the problems that Gandhi encountered and spoke against are still alive and real, it is also that Gandhi's own understanding of how to counter this propaganda, even that desire and quest is still also very much alive. So whatever is the force and power of Gandhi or the figure of Gandhi today, that thinking, that approach that Gandhi has left behind is very, very strong. And for me, I would say that if today we find that the animosity or, against Gandhi, or all these various shades of, anti-Gandhian rhetoric and propaganda, if it is alive today, though it is disturbing in itself, I would say it's also one of the best, proofs of how powerful that Gandhian idea was, that despite so many challenges, so much propaganda, so many books written, mostly bad books, uh, even then this spirit of something that he's left behind exists in us.
How did your interest in Gandhi has begun?
Right. I think it was this course on Indian nationalism that we did, I think, if I'm not wrong, in 1997 during my MPhil with Professor Rajiv Bhargav, who later became my supervisor for my MPhil and PhD. So in that Indian nationalism course, we studied Gandhi, we studied Nehru, Vivekanand, and others. And there, I think, I first encountered Hind Swaraj as a text, and we discussed it in class. And it was a very, very different sort of text from, let's say, Nehru's Discovery of India, or Tagore's lectures on nationalism. Those were very different than this text, because it almost comes with a structure and a thinking which is not very easily accessible to the way we grew up as a generation thinking about politics. This was something very different. And of course, later we read commentaries on the Hind Swaraj, and we come to know about its Socratic dimension, the kind of Platonic dialogue style in which it is written, and how it also brings about this very interesting debate, which is a kind of a civilizational debate between the East and the West, between modern and non-modern. And these were questions that maybe, we thought were sorted out, that we had chosen, we had made choices on these questions. But Gandhi's text, Hind Swaraj, comes and makes us, think on these choices and the question behind these choices in a more, sometimes strange and sometimes very complicated manner, because uh, he actually brings back certain big questions about civilization, modernity, in a way where we have to negotiate with a certain kind of, if I may call it, epic thinking, because not all thinking in what we call political thought to be epic or to have an epic dimension. We are not always used to reading this sort of writing of an epic dimension. And Gandhi's text actually makes us think about the question of civilization, East and West, modern, non-modern, in a very, very epic sort of way. And he looks at the question of, our anti-colonial movement as a sort of an epic moment where we had to think about these big questions, which are, of course, questions that even Gandhi, apart from Gandhi, Tagore, also confronted, Nehru confronted, others also confronted, Ambedkar confronted in his very own way, by actually raising questions from critical questions from within Indian civilization, right? Putting it into question as well about what it is, and what we have to throw out of it, to become a more humane civilization. So to come back to Gandhi, so that Hind Swaraj, presented to us a very sort of uh, new, fresh, radical, challenging sort of thought to deal with. So that's where I think I first took note of Gandhi through his thinking. But I think it was also maybe that very year or the next year when we did another course where we studied Ashish Nandi's book, The Intimate Enemy. And that book, I think, had a very profound impact on me, because not just, the way Nandi was looking at Gandhi in this very, very unique and interesting manner, and also putting the terms of the debate, in this, through these very interesting binaries, where you had to look at the feminine and masculine question, for instance, and think of what Gandhi was doing to a psychosexual understanding of what a political movement means. So these sort of questions that Nandi raises in that book made me realize that there's something more complicated going on in Gandhi. Though he is raising these big questions, within these big questions, there are also being other things that are being framed within it. So all of this made it so fascinating that I realized that after I initially worked on Nehru for my MPhil, I thought it would be very interesting to contrast Nehru with Gandhi, and also get away from the conventional ways in which Nehru and Gandhi were seen and contrasted vis-a-vis each other, to actually see the relation between them, not by trying to force or converge a certain kind of affinity between them, but also see them as two very different sorts of thinking and imagination, trying to really grapple with this question of Indian nationalism, Indian nation, civilization, history, politics, violence. So I thought that it would be best to sort of open up all of this, and Gandhi became very central to that. And if I may add that, there was a friend of mine who I had met in JNU. He's still a friend. He's now teaching in Canada. And when I was discussing Gandhi with him one evening, he was the person who actually led me to study Emmanuel Levinas, the French thinker. And he told me that some of my understanding of Gandhi and some of the concerns that I was raising, on Gandhi's text, the Hind Swaraj, was very reminiscent of what Emmanuel Levinas thought. And that led me to read Levinas. And that was fascinating because one may read Levinas just in philosophical terms about, how he brought in this question of the other and what is the other in positive terms, because we have otherwise read, somebody say like Sartre, who raised the question of the historical other and the political other. And that other, as we know, was always posed in real historical and political terms as a negative figure. The other is a negative figure because the other is a figure of hostility, and it is against the other that we have to frame our politics. But Levinas brings in a very, very different sort of reading of the other, which is ethical, and coming from a certain Judeo-Christian tradition, he frames the other in positive terms. That the other is actually a figure not of not a figure who is despicable, but of a figure who is desirable. And it is only by negotiating a very positive, desirable relationship with the other can we even begin to think of sorting out the problems of history and politics. So all of this made Gandhi interesting, because Gandhi, in his own way, because he was also a very good reader of of Christian texts, somehow in a very original manner, without having read so much, modern European philosophy, but actually in a very original manner was saying things and even doing things which was reminiscent of what Levinas was arguing. And not just Levinas, even some others like Buber and others, though I have pointed out that there are differences between Buber and Gandhi. But Gandhi is a figure who can be placed within that larger neighborhood of ideas that the Judeo-Christian tradition had, and they were, being aired through these figures like Levinas. So all of this, I think kept me hooked on Gandhi.
From your introduction, you actually bring in together several thinkers in your narrative and tries to place Gandhi's non-violence and also tries to look at the nature of violence that is happening in India, especially since the Direct Action Day till the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi. And you also reflect on the question, what it is, what does it mean to write a history of this very violent period, right? Could you give some reflections on it?
Yes, I think, though by training, I am a political scientist, I'm at home with something we know as political theory or political philosophy. That's my area. But when I read the material for this book, I realized that I just cannot do theory here. I just cannot, make, theoretical observations or indulge in theoretical discussions about, what happened. Because something so radically, violent happened during this period that this violence had to be addressed historically first, because it is only by getting into some of the empirical details of what happened can we begin to think about what it really was. Also because once we just figure out things in through a certain kind of ideological theoretical thinking, we tend to form these very rigid grids under which we tend to read these sort of events. And I did not want to do that, because I thought that uh, you know there are so many things happening in these 15 months of Gandhi that I have described in detail, that I first need to get into the bottom of the human story, that what was actually happening to human beings, what were human beings doing to human beings, and what are those details, and what do these details convey, and how much do they manage to unsettle some of the narratives, whether they are historical or theoretical or philosophical. What do these narratives do in order to unsettle these uh, rather disciplinary work that has happened around them. Because I wasn't happy when I read, some of the historical and theoretical work around partition, and even some of them touching upon Gandhi, because I thought that there was already, ideologically preconceived ideas, which then tried to sort of understand and place, the events that happened around the time of partition into a sort of straitjacket, and also using these very conventional terms in which we try to understand such events like secular, communal, Hindu, Muslim, and all of that, because I thought that if something as grievous, as partition happened, we need to first get into the heart of the story. We need to actually mourn the story, and we also need to feel for ourselves what does it really mean to us. And for that, if some of our theoretical assumptions and understandings have to be kept aside, even if we have to sort of go against them, we should have the courage to do that, because like I have also argued in this book that history owes no fidelity to theory, and history sometimes behaves like a mad group of elephants walking past and creating devastations. So let us face that challenge, and face that challenge that people have faced with their lives, they paid for with their lives, and let's think about all these questions that are dear to us, which are fine. Think about non-violence, think about secularism, think about Hindu-Muslim friendship, but without, for once, in any way, tempering or tampering with, the difficult questions, the problems that are, very much there, without which all this violence wouldn't have occurred in the first place. So we can keep giving our rhetoric, but we have to somewhere explain about what happened. And what happened again cannot be understood in very straitjacketed manner about, oh, this was all communal, and it's communal versus something else. No, I think there is culpability across the political spectrum about what happened, and we need to take cognizance of that. So that led me to the kind of work that I ended up doing.
So towards the end of your introduction, in your book, you talk about this pathetic history and the factual history. Could you reflect on that?
Yeah, I was, reading Pavo Haviko, who is a very, very interesting thinker. He passed away recently. And Haviko was once called the best kept secret of Europe. And he, apart from his poetry, which is mostly, ecological poetry, he also, wrote aphoristic prose. And some of them are reflections on the history and politics of his time. And when I read this, this section on history about how he makes this distinction between the pathetic and the factual, I thought that, even though we have, Nietzsche talking about history, or our famous historians talking about history, and I have read them. I've read those historians, and I've read, somebody like Nietzsche talking about history, or Marx or Hegel, or any other enlightenment figure talking about history. I thought what this poet and aphorist was doing was not just making, something very simple for us by making this, contrast between factual and and pathetic. By doing this, he was actually also, getting into the heart of the matter. And also, we can, put in all the historians that we have read, all the other thinkers that we have read of history, they can also be placed vis-a-vis this sort of interesting, this binary that, he's sort of creating between two kinds of history, that there's the pathetic and the factual. And I don't really mean binary here in a negative sense. I am just saying that he creates these two kinds of reading of history and understanding of history. And I could also see, our own history being reflected and our reading of that history being reflected in these two terms that Haviko created. And I thought that, well, though at the face of it, we would say that pathetic history is something that is really bad because that is sentimentalizing history. That is what communal thinkers or communal historians would tend to do. But the other history, which is supposed to be more reflective, more rational, that also has its limits. That also has its limits in the sense that how much, for instance, does feelings, play part in that sort of history? Where does our subjectivity, for instance, figure in that sort of history? Or is it all about, rationality and all of that? Because sometimes what it can do is this idea of factual history can actually, make rational demands upon what is, desirable in history. And often, that goes into a sort of justificatory, narratives about power in the name of rationality. Just because rationality is supposed to be something liberating and good for you. So any sort of power, maybe, which is, batting for rationality is supposed to be, liberating power. But we have known in the 20th century how in the name of rationality, utterly barbaric, you know, nation states, appeared and created havoc on human life. So I wanted to raise this question about both kinds of histories in the way, in fact, that Paviko himself raises it. What I found interesting was Pavo Haviko was not, pitting one idea of history as a better idea against the other. He was actually telling us that, look, there are these two kinds of history and there is something seriously wrong with both of them. And that as if we are trapped between the two. So that I thought was a way more interesting way of looking at history. And I wanted to do that also because not only, for the reason that history became central to my book, but also because of Gandhi. That Gandhi for me, and this is not something that, many people have pointed out, but I have in very, serious and concrete terms in my book, that Gandhi has to be understood as a profoundly anti-historical thinker. That Gandhi's power comes from this very anti-history sort of, sensibility that he has. And by being, anti-historical, I don't mean he's ahistorical. So there's a, so that has to be kept in mind. Ahistory means, not asking questions of, say, things that have happened in history. Not that. He's anti-historical because he identifies particularly modern history as a site of violence, where violence is justified. And against the justification of modern history, Gandhi is, thinking in a very anti-historical manner, because he thinks that only in that manner can he place something a counter narrative to modern history. And that is what he actually does in the Hind Swaraj. His idea of history in Hind Swaraj, between the history of the everyday and the larger idea of history between history and itihas, what Ajay Skaria, for instance, pointed out very brilliantly in his book. So that's the kind of thing I was dealing with in this book, and I was confronting. So that's where it's all coming from.
No, that is very, very interesting way to think about Gandhi as anti-historical. I think that's where I want to talk about the next question. While he have seen the history as a site of violence, especially the 20th century, so can you explain us about Gandhi's non-violence? Now, and I'm asking this question essentially to know its limits also, because at some point, some scholars like Arendt and as well as Orwell pointed out that it would not have worked in Stalin's Russia or in Hitler's Germany. So, how did Gandhi conceptualize this nonviolence in the century that is filled with violence?
Right. Yeah, that's an important question, and it is also important because this question is often raised not just about Gandhi but against Gandhi. Let me, begin by going to that point of origin where Gandhi joins the freedom movement, because what is very interesting about that moment is that when Gandhi joins the movement, or rather the struggle, which he sort of transforms into a movement, he brings in this very serious idea of civil disobedience. But his idea of civil disobedience is not a mere borrowing from Thoreau and others. It is not exactly the same as what happened in America. Not exactly how people thought during the Boston Tea Party moment and other moments. He gets the idea of civil disobedience from there, but what he does is give it a unique sort of an Indian twist, right? And you can also say that this twist is also something civilizational. These days, there are all sorts of ways in which the word civilization is used. But I think we can also use it, in Gandhian terms, because that's the way he also used it. And not just him, but also, thinkers like Tagore. So what Gandhi did to civil disobedience is bring in these two very interesting ideas, concepts, or principles: satyagraha and ahimsa. And satyagraha being this desire for truth, or you may say the eagerness for truth, right? So making this question of truth so central, and which actually, became very interesting because it was such an open idea that it was not just at the moral sphere that you could raise this question of truth and say that, look, the colonial regime is a regime of untruth. But you can just raise the question of truth, about anything, even about, let's say, the method of struggle. And Gandhi then brings in the concept of ahimsa to sort of, attach it with the question of satyagraha, that how, one is impossible without the other. Because it is only by, or it is only through ahimsa that we can realize the meaning of satyagraha. That we can only do satyagraha through ahimsa, in the sense that it only when there is something like non-violence, or something, where people are by will and by force not indulging in violence. So this is actually, again, a much more, kind of, a much more stronger idea than the idea of peaceful protest, which was, say, there during the earlier civil disobedience movement. That was also envisaged as something peaceful. Demonstration has to be peaceful. This is also peaceful. This is also about peace. But what Gandhi is adding to peace is that you cannot understand or realize the meaning of peace without being non-violent. So this idea of non-violence is constantly to be understood and pitted against this proclivity, for violence, towards violence. And when you realize this, when you can realize this principle in a sort of collective sense as a part of your politics, that is when this whole thing is possible. So he is not just merely introducing nonviolence as a sort of an individual ethic. He's also introducing it as a collective ethic. He's introducing it as a political ethic, and he's saying that look, when there is a very strong power that we have to dislodge and we have to remove, it is best done in this method. Now, this method, of course, as you mentioned, has been, questioned by many thinkers, and Hannah Arendt is one of them. And I did mention that, I found Arendt's, this negative remark on Gandhi, not very thoughtful and not very, something that she didn't really think through, and also that she did not actually give nonviolence its due before making that remark. Because the point is that if you have to judge the effectiveness of nonviolence through two of the most barbaric regimes of the 20th century, Hitler's and Stalin's, then that itself shows that you're conceding a lot of ground to nonviolence. That is how I would read it. That it is, of course, true that the British, empire, allowed that sort of space for Gandhi to experiment with truth and to experiment with non-violence politically and raise a challenge. It was possible because of that space that the British Empire, created. But then, as others have also shown, that they did not, create it, out of good feelings or something, or they thought that, this is something that won't affect them. But they were rather pretty much also forced by the nature of their rule to do that, because they needed, the people of India to sort of, help them, or help them in certain ways to, to sort of run this economy, which they were profiting from. So in order to run that economy smoothly, the British government needed, the people. And for that, they could not, take very extreme measures, the people. So Gandhi could understand and cleverly use that space to unleash this very, very strong, movement. And Hannah Arendt, in that sense, fails to somewhere, I think, appreciate it uh, by just, putting in this extreme case of, look, here it wouldn't work. Yeah, it wouldn't work. I mean, nothing would work. Nothing would work against barbarism. What would work? Against a regime like Hitler's or Stalin's or Mao's, for that matter. So when any political regime is not going to hold back on violence and will unleash infinite violence on people, and it doesn't matter to them, then of course the Gandhian experiment will fail. But there is, there is no novelty in pointing this out, really, because then what needs to be focused upon, rather, I would say, is what is barbarism, which of course Hannah Arendt has done very, very well. But the point is that, that this question on Gandhi's, the method of, Gandhi's effectivity, how much that is possible in such under such regimes. That is, of course, something about the limit principle, and where we have to concede that there are these limit principles where Gandhian techniques or methods of struggle won't work. But if I would have answered, I don't know, the question on non-violence enough. But see, I would just add that, so non-violence is, um, even though, primarily an ethic, which seems to be moral, but it is actually not moral, but it is more primarily ethical. Because moral is, of course, the injunction of not doing something. But ethics is actually telling you why are you not supposed to do it. You are not supposed to do it because there is the other that you cannot violate, the other in the world. So you cannot violate the other. So ethics actually, in a way informs morality about, what is that element which is fundamental to the injunction, which is a negative injunction, and morality is often, fundamentally a negative injunction about what you shouldn't do. But why should you not do it? The positive side of that injunction is what ethics brings into the picture, and which is actually Gandhi's point that we cannot indulge in violence because the other exists, and the other is somebody you face, and he is the face to face. So you cannot commit violence on the other. So that sort of positive injunction and this sort of a negative injunction both come together and collapse into this Gandhi's idea of non-violence, which is both negative and positive at the same time.
If I can further probe you on understanding the limits of violence and non-violence, so we see a lot of differences between Gandhi and Subhash Chandra Bose, right? So can we actually see their relationship in the context of Gandhi's exploration about the limits of violence itself?
Yeah, this is an interesting question. See, I mean, the Gandhi Bose question often, of course, passing through Nehru, when leaders uh, are seen, when these leaders are seen by our thinkers and even our, contemporary political leaders, they look at this conglomeration in such a way that, there is Gandhi on the one hand, there is, of course, Nehru, and there is Bose. So there are certain matters in which Nehru and Bose come, they come close to each other. There are certain aspects in which they are apart. Gandhi is almost accused of being a figure who actually came between Nehru and Bose. So all of these debates have, happened through the decades. So as we see, particularly in the last phase of Gandhi's, which is so interesting because Bose leaves or is sort of forced to leave the Congress because of his differences with Gandhi. But what is interesting here for me is Gandhi had already by then, before his differences with Bose came up, had managed to put a proper political movement in place. And that movement was, with full force, making its presence felt in the streets and making the British Empire, stand up and take notice. Now, in that context, even if, let's say, a rivalry happens between Gandhi and somebody else, let's say it happened with Jinnah before, and then it happens with Bose. So what does Bose really do? Bose, of course, builds another party, but finally, what he does is he's too restless, and he thinks that, there has to be some sort of an armed struggle or a sort of a armed resistance or fight against the British Empire, and then he goes to Europe and then to Southeast Asia to build that sort of support for a sort of an armed resistance, and not just a resistance, but also sort of an armed attack. on the British Empire. Now, he is completely moved away from the idea of the freedom movement that Gandhi and others were, had launched in India, which was a street, based non-violent struggle. And there were different, concerns raised about how successful or how effective Bose's challenge would be. In fact, Bose's supporters, who would be very quick to dismiss the Gandhian movement and poke, fun at Gandhi's, non-violence, would actually not, be equally critical enough about how much did Bose's sort of, a violent campaign, succeeded. The failure of that campaign, should also be then equally critically studied about why did Lady Bose fail. And so, so the question is not about, I think, mere effectivity, though we can also, raise these questions about the effectivity of Bose's method vis-a-vis Gandhi's method. But I think also at a deeper level, if we think politically, how much did, say, Bose, by going out of India and forming the INA, manage to really, make an impact in concrete terms, in the streets, the way maybe the Gandhian movement was able to. Because the point is, yes, Bose was a very courageous and a great leader. And Bose really managed to, be part of our psyche in so many ways. We do think about, Subhash Bose as this really, this very brave, courageous leader who dared to think differently, from Gandhi, and did all he could to, bring the prisoners of war together and launch this attack on the British Empire, which really must have rattled them, to some degree. But the larger, fate of the world, the Second World War, and what was perhaps inevitable, were questions, that were perhaps missed by Bose. And also then what eventually led to, its defeat at the borders. But like I said, my question would be to ask, more concrete political questions about effectivity, because what you leave behind, as a legacy of a certain movement that you do, is something that, we find, let's say, after independence, yes, India had to go to war, couple of times. And in those moments, we might, think about this aspect that, yes, the nation also sometimes, needs to use violent measures to defend itself and to attack the enemy. So all of that is, a part of being a nation. But in an everyday sense, in the life of a democracy, the questions of politics and methods of struggle are those where this legacy of movements, where, a lot of people could come together and come into the streets and challenge, power. That's what I think is more crucial for us to think about. Yeah.
No, before we enter to discuss about Gandhian methods, I want to probe one more question about the religion, right? Gandhi writes, and I quote, "Those who say that religion has nothing to do with politics do not know what religion means." Stop quote. And now in today's India, we see religion being central to the politics of ruling parties and in creating the atmosphere of perpetual violence and fear in the country. So, how did Gandhi view this link between religion, politics, and violence, as well as non-violence?
Yes, that's also a very important question, and I've addressed that question, to at some length in my book, as you would know. So I've made this important distinction in relation to that quote that you read out, that what is often misunderstood and has been misunderstood by a lot of scholars is that Gandhi was not trying to religionize politics. He was rather trying to politicalize religion. And I've, coined this neologism in the book, politicalize. Not politicize, because politicize means something else. Politicalize means that at the level of the political, at the level of the idea and concept of what you know uh, the meaning of political is. Politics is often understood as everyday politics, whereas the political is what is the ideational ground of of politics. So at that level, I'm arguing in the book that Gandhi is not actually, when he's making that remark, he's not trying to, turn politics religious, which is probably something which is being done today, as you pointed out. So the difference between the two is that when you try to religionize politics or bring religion into politics, what you're trying to do is you are bringing certain, you know, religious demarcations of understanding, of community, of the community to which that religion belongs to or from where it springs from, vis-a-vis other communities. So how one religion would look at, people of a religion would look at people of other religions. Also about, what is the religious ethic about, which has to do with, a community's, internal life of beliefs and practices. And to actually push that into the political realm is to then try to say that, look, now politics is going to be conducted by the principles and precepts of religion. So that again, breaks the modern idea of politics as an independent sphere of activity, which is somewhere largely because of its, relationship, let's say, with the ideas of the Enlightenment, as we know of, has a sort of secular basis to it. And there's this secular sphere to the modern idea of politics, and what religion and the bringing of religion into politics does is precisely to sort of marginalize that secular sphere and to push that secular sphere back to and then to fill it up with what is religious. And in that sense, it is basically trying to, religionize politics, like I'm saying, because that's when, anything that we consider religious is sort of, going to have a field day, because everything is going to be understood, interpreted, and even perhaps forced to be in religious terms. And that's a problem, because when you are dealing with a multi-religious society, and if you're trying to push religion into politics, it is also simultaneously clear that you are actually pushing the majority's religion into politics. So majoritarian politics is exactly trying to do that all the time. It is trying to bring in, religious aspects, which include prejudices, certain hierarchical practices, certain anti-egalitarian, ideas into the sphere of politics, justifying them, and also then using it against other religions, because this is not about, religion coming into politics does not mean that everybody's religion is going to come into politics. It is only one religion that is going to dictate, what politics is going to be. So that is the majoritarian sort of, movement and majoritarian, impulse, to religionize politics according to the structure and nature of, that one religion which belongs to the majority. Gandhi, on the other hand, is trying to say that, look, in modern times, in modernity, the political is such that even religion cannot stay out of it. So if we have to even understand religion today, we have to understand it politically, in the sense that if there are certain things that are wrong from today's perspective, from modern sensibility. For instance, if caste hierarchy is bad, if the notion of enmity and prejudice against other religions is something wrong, and if somewhere that has, become part of religious thinking, that has to go. So in fact, we need to politicalize religion, as in we need to look at religion in a political manner in order to address some of the problems within religion. We cannot just let religion be. Religion has to, be activated. For instance, that all these practices, like caste practices, even questions of how, let's say, people belonging to the Hindu religion would see its relationship with others, all these then become political questions. So by making these questions political within religion, Gandhi is politicalizing religion. But he's also saying at the same time that by this, religion obviously gets into the sphere of the political. So this is also different and a critique of the typical secular kind of politics as well. Secular nationalists in India have actually not understood Gandhi when they constantly keep saying anything, religious is communal, and so it has to be kept up. So they imagine a very, very secure, safe, pure realm of the secular. That purity of the secular is a problem. Secular sphere is not a pure sphere. It cannot be like that. And Gandhi knew it to be like that. In fact, if you keep it pure, then you actually somewhere enable the religious takeover, a majoritarian takeover of politics. Don't keep it so safe and secure. Don't be paranoid about it. This is the kind of secular paranoia. Gandhi did not have this paranoia because he was very clear about his ethical principles, that he was not going to allow religion to take over politics, no, but he was going to allow religion and politics to have a very close dialogue with each other. In fact, the absence of that dialogue between religion and politics, I think, is something that secular politics, so-called, in India has suffered. Secular politics in India has suffered, I would say, very strongly because of, just not allowing this dialogue to persist, to continue. We needed to do this. I think this was a problem even with Nehru. Nehru was such a fierce secularist. Anything, anywhere related to religion, he would keep it out. Of course, there was the trauma of partition and people were paranoid about religion. So one can understand, that to some extent. But then I think fundamentally what Gandhi tried to do was far more sophisticated, complicated, effective also, though it didn't really finally work, during partition and his last phase. But still, I think, we need to, persist with this, this dialogue between religion and politics. Even in our universities, for instance, we should not keep religious studies out. For instance, students should be allowed to read religion, study, understand religion, because only staying away from it and constantly using a secular rhetoric against it doesn't really work.
No, this is where I want to talk about one of the important movements by Gandhi during the freedom struggle, that is the Khilafat movement. Now, Khilafat movement have no direct bearing on Indian political scenario, right? It is about restoring the power of Khilaf, who was displaced after the World War One. Now, but Khilafat movement for Gandhi was a very important political struggle, as you point out in your book. Can you explain us why?
Look, Gandhi has been, of course, uh, criticized most fiercely, of course, by the Hindu right, but also by others, even by the left, about his stance during the Khilafat movement. And I think even some of the members of the Congress, were also puzzled by this. But Gandhi had a very, very clear, I think, anti-colonial, anti-Western idea of not only what Indian politics should be, but also about what uh, by what means we should challenge the British Empire, which is of course to take the Hindu-Muslim question together. So even though even Gandhi knew as much as anybody else that the Khilafat symbolized a sort of a conservative pan-Islamic movement. But Gandhi thought that, look, this was a chance for us in India to not look at the Khilafat from the modern secular, even Western perspective of what the Khilafat is, but to see it from a perspective of something which is, even if contrary to the principles of modern, secularism, is actually, to understand politics or what is political through what is possible within this whole practice of friendship between Hindus and Muslims. Because what he felt was that, coming from a third world, colonized nation, Indians really did not have that sort of, luxury, if I may put it, to merely look at the Khilafat as a site of Muslim power. And because by doing that, then you are also then making a lot of allowances for Western colonial power. So how do you place yourself vis-a-vis these two? And Gandhi was very clear that, look, whatever Khilafat means in itself, if the Muslims have a sentiment for it, all right, good or bad, we as a whole, as a country, we are going to, challenge the West, and when we are going to be with the Khilafat, which is again going to really, bring the Hindus and Muslims together by, telling the Muslims that, look, uh, in this in this matter where which is a sentimental issue for you, it is also a sentimental issue for us. And here, in fact, Gandhi also did not fail to sort of tell the West that, look, I know, despite all your liberal principles, what are you going to do? Once you dislodge and one the Khilafah, once you put your own people, what sort of great stuff you're going to do. So Gandhi also had sort of, no trust in Western colonial power, even though it was, backed by some liberal rhetoric. So Gandhi was actually placing a different sort of modernist understanding of the political, which is partly civilizational, partly fraternal. And he was, pretty much willing to go all out to risk it, risk this sort of a politics and pose it vis-a-vis the dominant principles of Western, political imagination. So, so that I thought was, very interesting about Gandhi's, sort of approach to the Khilafat movement. Though, of course, it did not really work out as we know, because then it went, into a very different sort of zone, and a lot of communal Muslim leaders and that sort of politics really took over, and there was violence. So it was counterproductive ultimately. But I do think that even now, when I look back at the Khilafat movement, I think Gandhi had a point in what he was trying to do, which was not just look at it from the perspective of something conservative vis-a-vis something progressive, but also place the question of fraternity as something as central as something else, as any other principle of modern politics.
Now, I want to further probe on the way Gandhi tried to establish relationship with the Muslim community in India, right? There are arguments made by many, including the likes of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and Savarkar, that Gandhi was more kinder to Muslims than Hindus. Ambedkar writes in his book that in order to preserve Hindu-Muslim unity, Gandhi did not mind the murders of few Hindus. Gandhi himself shared that one of the correspondents asks him why he shouldn't be called Muhammad Gandhi, right? Can you give some reflections on this particular accept? Is he actually a Muhammad Gandhi?
That sort of epithet that is, that was used by this journalist calling him Muhammad Gandhi. This, of course, is pretty connected to our times, because similar sort of stuff are being, written about Gandhi on social media, every other day. And this sort of a very, very, motivated propaganda is used against Gandhi. But let's look into the nature of what exactly this means. What is meant by putting a Muhammad before Gandhi? What is the person really trying to say, or what is the person trying to provoke? So what is very clear is that what is understood by this person is that when there is a moment of confrontation between two communities, the only acceptable task for a person belonging to, one community is to be completely against, or, have strong feelings of animosity against the other. That is supposed to be the natural way of things, because if my community is, at war with another community, or that community is at war with mine, my natural communal, sort of understanding should be very simple and clear, that I have, that I am against the other community. Now, Gandhi is not a regular, general citizen sitting there and contemplating on intercommunal rivalry and violence and all that. Gandhi is somebody who is a political leader, and one of his most important tasks is to address this question of Hindu-Muslim friendship, even facing the worst provocation as he did, and everybody else did during the partition. Now, when there is a moment of strife, what does a person who is trying to forge a positive relationship between two communities do? He would, of course, reach out to the other community. He would have to break certain so-called natural lines of distance and animosity and cross over to the other side, because the only thing in a moment of violence is violence, then ethics, or what we understand as ethics, immediately becomes what is construed as the impossible. So Gandhi, in a way, does what is impossible, what is not possible to do. Now, what is possible and what is not possible? If it is determined in communal ways, then you can, of course, say that, that all we can think about in moments of strife, or even without maybe moments of strife, is to sort of maintain distance and animosity with others. But if Gandhi is able to break that and make an example that, look, even in a moment of strife, a gesture of friendship is possible. And it is possible as a Hindu, that I, Gandhi, as a Hindu, and he never, refrained from saying that he's not one, but he's actually saying that, that I am reaching out to the Muslim not as a secular Hindu, but as a religious Hindu, that it is within my religion, it is within the ethic of my religion to cross that so-called natural communal line and reach out to the other person. So by doing this, like I said, when he's trying to politicalize religion, he's also ethicalizing religion, and he's making this gesture, which is impossible in certain ways, but he's making that impossible possible. So, so this is a sort of demand that Gandhi is making on people who think that they are religious, and because they are religious or they belong to religion, they have to then, be naturally disposed against the other, people in this manner. Even during the time of the Khilafat, and like you said, people raised questions against Gandhi. Ambedkar did, Savarkar did. Some of the comments that they made against Gandhi, that he reached out to the Muslims, beyond maybe what he should have done, or like being more kinder to Muslims than to his own community. These are, in retrospect now, we can see, are very flippant and unthoughtful remarks. In Savarkar's case, of course, particularly, very motivated. The point is that these motivations are coming again from a very realist understanding of politics. That the realist understanding of politics is that whenever there is a moment of strife, that somebody has done something to you, that there is no other way. The only natural response, the only natural, realist, communal response is to show your animosity against them. Now, Gandhi is breaking that realist understanding. He's saying that no, his ethical understanding, which is anti-realist, is actually saying that no, I have to reach out to the Muslims precisely because this cannot go on, or this shouldn't go on. But they're also actually wrong, because as I've shown in the book, and readers will find out, that Gandhi made some very strong remarks against the violence that was perpetrated, not just by Muslims during the Khilafat movement, but also, let's say, in the murder of Swami Shraddhanand. Gandhi made very, very strong comments on Shraddhanand's murder, even though he called the murderer his brother. That's the style of Gandhi's, language. But that does not mean that he was in any way soft on the murder or on the murderer or on this larger, problem of Muslim violence. Whether it is through mass forced conversion, or it is about sheer violence. And Gandhi has spoken up, spoken out on occasions on violence unleashed by the Muslim community, even forced conversion. Sometimes Gandhi is seen as somebody having very conservative notions about about conversion. But Gandhi has, the problem of forced conversion in mind, which is often overlooked by people, because that's a historical reality and a political reality that has happened in our, in our history, our anti-colonial period. And Gandhi is sensitive to it, and he has all the right to be. So I would, then to come back to the larger input of your question, that that this sort of accusation of Gandhi, that Gandhi was, kinder and all of that, to Muslims, is on the one hand not true. On the other hand, whatever truth is there behind the statement is actually, vindicated by the fact that uh, if you have a large minority, living with you, what would you desire of it? Would you desire lifelong animosities, violence, or would you desire friendship? And Gandhi has shown us that, that it is possible to sort of at least think and, you know, uh, to think, imagine, and put in practice certain, what I would call, say, certain sort of, almost something like, ethical strategies, perhaps, to deal with this question of violence between, the two communities. And these ethical strategies, which are also political strategies, need to be imagined and thought only when you are able to, get out of that realist sort of position and realist understand that, oh, look, this is how it is, and this is how we will take it. There is violence, okay, so we will do, we will use violence, which is again, which is more limiting, because violence means, all your arguments have ended. There is no argument left. Gandhi gave an argument against it.
Further probing on something which you have just said, Gandhi really have a knack for telling people things that they don't want to hear at particular times. Like, for example, calling Swami Shraddhanand's murderer as his brother. So, for example, there is also that when people come in fear of being killed in communal clashes, Gandhi tells them to give up their lives courageously rather than fear death, right? He even writes a letter in October 1946 that, and I quote, "There is art in dying also. As it is, all die, but one has to learn by practice how to die a beautiful death." Stop quote. Was he indifferent to the sufferings of the people, and what does it mean to die a beautiful death?
Yeah, I think that is a question that, needs to be speculated upon a lot more than it usually, is the case, because this is very central, uh, not just to Gandhi's peace mission, to that campaign of his last 15 months, but also something that we will keep confronting in our own time, and will with and what people will confront in times to come. Um, Gandhi is, of course, somebody who is not, you know, fetishizing either non-violence or human suffering or even human courage. Somewhere Gandhi, as I have understood, uh, and also something that, I think Ashish Nandi does not fail to point out, that he had a very strong psychological understanding of human beings, of human nature, and even of politics, like what politics is. And Gandhi's psychological approach is, I think, very evident in this particular case. Uh, because you see, when people are confronted by, mass violence, when there is very little space to escape, where perhaps, death is, almost inevitable. So what does one do in those moments? And Gandhi is fiercely, furiously thinking about that question. And he is playing on the psyche of his audience. The first thing he wants to impress upon them is that, look, fear doesn't work and fear doesn't help. Fear means, you die and you die badly. And fear might actually, induce, a certain kind of weakness, which can make, you a victim of violence even, more quickly, more easily than you can think of. So the first thing is to to really impress upon people what fear is and what fearlessness is. So abhay, is something that Gandhi really put emphasis on. And also in the larger context of the non-violent struggle, where you can face state violence, that you need to practice, you need to inculcate fearlessness. So that even during partition violence, mass violence, that comes into the picture, that what you do when faced with this violence. So he's saying that, look, courage is something that you need to have, because once he tells people that just run for your life, right? Now he could say that, but for me, I realize and I understand that it is also actually saying nothing. It is saying the obvious. When there is violence and somebody's coming to kill you, you, of course, in a sense of self-preservation, you will run, you will do something to protect yourself, to save yourself. Now, I think Gandhi could have said that, let's say. Gandhi could have said, look, there is violence, please save yourself, do whatever you can, to save yourself. But Gandhi is saying something more difficult. Gandhi is saying that, look, don't run away, be there, face it. Because Gandhi is also aware of the larger question and the larger problem that, once you leave, and so what is this violence about? The partition violence, let's say, Noakhali, was precisely about, not just killing people, but also once they flee in fear, to take over their land. So it was also sort of a taking over of property and land. And once people leave en masse, then you lose your land and property forever. So Gandhi is somewhere also trying to, tell people that, look, the situation is difficult. He cannot, give them weapons. There is a huge imbalance between the perpetrator and the victim. But at least what the victim can do is not completely, leave the place which is theirs. So at least do something, show courage. It is also sometimes, true that often when you actually show courage, that probably, when you come together, the perpetrator can perhaps be pushed back. Things can really happen. So there are possibilities in courage. There are possibilities that may open up when there are moments of courage, where you can also force the perpetrator to think. You can also, make it not that easy for the perpetrator to sort of easily take over everything that you have. So he's, putting these thoughts and energies into the minds of people, so that, it is not all helter-skelter. Because it is not that would have avoided people from being killed, people from dying. But it would have happened at the expense of these other things. And also the whole point, like I said, to repeat, that when you actually respond out of fear, you end up making more mistakes. And perhaps, in fact, when I was growing up, this is very interesting, when I was growing up in Assam, and some of my, my father's friends would drop in and narrate stories of partition violence. There would be a lot of stories they would tell us of how, Hindu neighborhoods would retaliate, would come together and think of ways of retaliation. How they would collect staff and make it difficult for the perpetrators to completely kill everybody, or just run amok. That they will also sort of fight back. And these stories are told, even if they are said with a certain kind of strong communal tinge to them, which is understandable in some moments. But these stories of courage are, of course, narrated to show that, look, we fought back. So what was wrong with Gandhi then? Gandhi was also telling people to fight back, to not run away. Because running away means you lose everything. You lose your land, you lose your future, you lose a lot of things. So not just lives. Maybe if some people show courage, some others may, also maybe, be saved from that courage. So in moments of strife, it is easy to just tell people that, go and run. And it is not that, Gandhi is telling people to, self-preserve, or not telling them to, would have made any difference, because, there's a very strong instinctual, thing in us to save our lives. And there is absolutely nothing wrong in doing that. But Gandhi was, making that sort of gesture against the, the natural self-preservatory instinct, to sort of do this counterintuitive thing, that show courage, show this, because there were these other concerns. And to come to the related question that you asked about the art of dying, I mean, this is precisely it. I mean, when Gandhi introduced himself into the freedom struggle, and when he knew that he's going to meet British power through this non-violent challenge that he would pose. And the way then again he thought during partition that, non-violence had, that gone out of the picture, and this was a free-for-all, and even he can be attacked or killed by any side, because there was propaganda against Gandhi, in the Muslim side, in the Hindu side. So he was open to violence. Again, I don't think, here he's aestheticizing violence or non-violence by bringing up this question of beauty. I would rather say that, here actually the art of dying, and dying beautifully, is more of an ethic, is more, in ethical terms that he's talking about, in the sense that what can be, say, more beautiful than to be vulnerable before impending violence. So he's trying to make us, aware of a certain kind of, death, which is a political death, which is made beautiful because it creates a lot of power and strength in vulnerability. That the power of violence is not absolute power. That the so-called absolute power of violence can be challenged by a counter power, which is vulnerable power, which is paradoxical power, a power which is vulnerable, and yet it has the strength and courage to meet it. So that sort of, but that power, because it is vulnerable, is also vulnerable to death. So if given a choice between this death and that death, you know, a death which is devoid of beauty because you are either running away or you are fearful or you are also, going and attacking your opponent, and then you meet, death that way, which is part of the, the chivalrous ethic of dying. Let's say, that you die in the battlefield fighting. Gandhi is not saying that he's not fighting. Gandhi is not saying that he's left the battlefield. The only twist, the interesting twist he's making to this is, no, I will be in the battlefield, I will fight, but I will not fight, with a sword or with a weapon. I will not fight violently. Can we fight non-violently? And so to see it in terms of beauty for me is not, like I said, something which is aestheticizing this idea, but to actually, I think, he's somewhere ethicalizing this idea using beauty. This beauty is, I think, ethical beauty. That's how I think, understand it.
I mean, in such a tough time, picking up such a position is a very tough task. I'm sure. But I want to, here is where I want to pick up the next question, which is about the Direct Action Day, right? Once the Direct Action Day was announced by Jinnah, the idea of nonviolence itself faced its biggest challenge. And since Direct Action Day, the violence became a very regular scenario in India. Now, what does this Direct Action Day and the violence that follows, even up till the partition, tell us about the Indian minds and psychology of communal violence in India? And was that psyche is still existent in India right now, where we are seeing an increase in communal violence? So, what does it tell us about?
Yeah, that is again a very pertinent question. So as we know, and as my book sort of, shows page after page, so it is not merely the fact that direct action was declared and suddenly people became violent and they went against each other, they went against each other's throats. It was not just that. Before the announcement of Direct Action Day, the Muslim League had organized and planned the genocidal violence that, it foot soldiers unleashed in Bengal. So that shows that there are always a group of people who are cold-blooded, who are not the hot-blooded ones who actually go and execute that violence. These are the cold-blooded people who actually organize and plan the violence weeks and months before it actually takes place. So that's where the real problem of this genocidal violence that happened during partition, we can take it back to. That's where it all starts, that where it begins. It begins at the stage of planning. People actually sit together. Imagine, some people sitting together around a table and actually planning and organizing, a violence that of this magnitude that will be unleashed, on a particular day. So that's one. Then, of course, after Direct Action Day is declared, you have people who were ready to then go and unleash it in the real world. They go and butcher people. And there is what you call a very, very strong, visible method. There, just as there is a strong method, of nonviolence that Gandhi, practiced, and he also practiced during his peace mission. There is a method in mass violence, and that method was seen, well executed during partition. So it's a combination of this cold-blooded organization and planning on the one hand, and this very hot-blooded execution that together, makes such devastating events possible. And what is the primary motive that combines and joins all of this? Now, that's, of course, to begin with, certain kind of, communal politics, but it's also fundamentally around the question of the nation. And the nation, which is often, seen in such laudatory terms, great terms, seen in mythic dimensions, but then that nation is almost as if impossible to exist without some original moment of violence and war that takes place, before that nation comes into being. And that's precisely what happened in India during partition. And it is interesting that, today when there are people who would blame, let's say, the Congress, for instance, or somebody else, that look, because of you guys, we had to face partition. So they obviously regard partition as something bad, something wrong that has happened. But it's also interesting that and ironical that they actually also use what happened during partition as a sort of logic and weapon to then extend the logic of communal animosity and violence. So I don't understand that if what happened during partition was really wrong and bad, then you would like to, overcome it and see to it that it doesn't happen again, right? But if you actually use the event of partition to argue for something that might lead us to another bloodshed, I really don't know, where your problem with partition is. Because, you cannot have a problem with partition and then want to return to it again. And then maybe, keep returning forever. For me, every communal violence that happens, at a mass scale in India or in Pakistan or Bangladesh, is somewhere trying to repeat that same logic of partition. To actually keep telling everybody that, look, that logic of partition is what we need to live by. That's everything, So this constant going back and repeating the logic of partition is very, clearly a sort of a communal fetish, for this sort of violence. What else can it be? Because if it seems it is very difficult for you to take it out of your head. And then you think the only way to deal with it is to return to it. So I don't know really whether these people who, want to foment new partitions everywhere, how much, they are sentimentally against partition. Because if partition, as it was, really a trauma of mass proportion, something we can call an Indian Holocaust for sure. So if we do not want to repeat that Holocaust, the least we can do is, of course, address that trauma, which I don't think has been addressed very well in our, very, very secular democratic setup that we have had after partition. It was sort of, kept aside, and maybe it also took time for people to, recover and come out of it. A friend of mine keeps telling me that, look, it was possible for me in this generation to write the kind of book I wrote on partition and Gandhi because I can see it from a distance now. It wasn't, that easy for my father's generation probably to see partition and write about it and about Gandhi and about others in the way that I have been able to do. So I think I understand that we needed time to sort of, cool down and calm down and reflect upon it. But what is really wrong is to heat it up again. I mean, why would we like to stoke those fires again and again, and to really repeat the moment of partition rather than, realizing the trauma and trying our best to see how we can maybe overcome it forever.
So while I understand that previous generations certainly have a lot of trouble when they write about partition because they have seen it intimately. So did you face any challenge writing about partition? What kind of psychological challenge have you faced when you're writing about it? If would you like to reflect on that?
Again, you have asked a very, very, I would say, important question in a very subjective sense, because this goes into the heart of my writing process of this book. And like I have shared with friends, even when I was reading the material, some of the portions, not just of violence, but how Gandhi was, dealing with it, were so moving that I had to really pause. And I had to pause and maybe, take a day or two out and then return to the manuscript, because it was, getting very heavy for me to deal with. And I've heard stories from my father and from others about partition while growing up. I was thinking about my father. He's no more, so I couldn't really have the conversations I would have liked to have with him now. So I was having those conversations with myself, and it was really difficult and suffocating at times, really to really deal and engage with this, without let's say people of that older generation being alive now, and me being able to talk to them. So in the absence of these people, I had to then just keep talking to myself and writing, and it became very, very heavy. So I took time. I took frequent pauses while writing this book to really cool myself down and to think about those times and what it would have meant to live in those times, and why would, let's say, even somebody like my father have such strong views, about Gandhi, about Nehru, about Muslims, about all sorts of things. So I could see that what how charged those times were, and it is not easy, and it should not be easy for us to pass very easy judgments on those people who really lived through those times. Yes, it is also our task. It's a very difficult task for our generation to be able to, still critically reflect, and overcome some of the extreme, feelings and thoughts that people might have had in those times. But it's also necessary to have empathy, and to also, not be so strictly judgmental or harsh about, judging those people of the past who were actually in the thick of violence. So these are really, very difficult moments in history and in life to really deal with and negotiate. In fact, particularly when I was, reading that Noakhali testimonies, which I used briefly in my Noakhali chapter, which is now being translated, in to English. This was a book of testimonies which Gandhi had requested, Nirmal Kumar Bose to write after he heard, these gruesome stories of violence, where particularly this old woman comes, carrying this long bone of her husband's, dead body. So that was something that provoked Gandhi to tell N.K. Bose to sort of write down these testimonies, which are invaluable. When I was actually going through some of those testimonies, it was very difficult for me to just keep reading. So I had to again take pauses while reading. So I took pauses while reading, while writing, because it was difficult to deal with that violence, and precisely why I thought then later while reading, the historians and the theoreticians, writing on partition, that I felt that elements of feeling, were lacking, and a sense of mourning was lacking in their language. I don't know and I don't care, how people mourned, in silence, because that is not something I'm coming to know. But I want to see that mourning. I want to see that, those feelings in your writing. Your writing can't be a typically rational, objective enterprise where you leave your feelings out. I mean, what is there to be, scared of your feelings? That's a typically enlightenment, sort of, rationalist paranoia, that you have to leave your feelings out. As if you bring your feelings, you might slip into something you don't want to say. But please say it. That's the problem. Communalism and communal politics and the success of it often stems from the fact that secularists often weaken their own case by this paranoia, towards feelings, towards what they really feel about certain things. And I think it is time really that we break this, we break this rational versus, so-called irrational impulse, but actually bringing our feelings into our writings so that we can actually say that, look, I mean, serious, objective scholarship does not mean that it has to keep feelings out.
There is always this academic silos between trying to be impartial and not bring in feelings. But I'm sure a text like this will not allow that, right? It needs a certain kind of thinking through our own emotions and coming in terms with it. So there is a sentence in your book which says that, and I quote, "It is not an exaggeration to say that Gandhi's peace mission in Noakhali, Bihar, Calcutta have no parallel in the history of the violent 20th century," and stop quote. So, could you reflect on the larger philosophical implications of these walking tours? What was going on in Gandhi's mind, and how was he being affected, and how was he trying to come and bring in peace in these regions?
I'm reminded of a sentence by Salman Rushdie. I forget where it is from, where he says that uh, defeated love is still greater than what defeats it. To say that, that even if you're defeated in love, if you, had genuine love in you, it still remains undefeated. That love still remains undefeated by the defeat it faces. So, for instance, the end of a love affair, for instance, in that sense, does not mean the end of love. It just means the end of an affair. So in Gandhi's case, his politics of love, which is, part of his politics of ahimsa, politics of friendship, all of this stems from his ethic of love and his politics of love. That, gives Gandhi his strength within. And that also gives, strength to Gandhi's character and figure, even when seen by others in the world, in his time, or even later in our times. So that politics of love, as we have seen, comes into serious, challenge during partition. But that does not, lead Gandhi to abandon love, right? I mean, in the thick of hatred, Gandhi is actually holding on to the only thing he knows, which is love. And what Gandhi is trying to tell the Muslims in Noakhali is that, look, love is still possible. And all this hatred that has been put into your brains by your masters, if you can just abandon it for a moment, overcome it for a moment, you can actually see that there is still love in this world. that all the Hindus don't hate you. The Hindus have not all vanished. They have not all fled. There are still people around. I have come from, all this way from Delhi, actually, talk to you and, sit and spend time with you, eat with you, drink with you, telling you that the world has not ended. So if your hatred, and if hatred as such, still does not, lead to the end of the world, what is left? What is left of the world that hatred cannot finish? That has to be somewhere, some semblance of love, which does not make the world end, despite, the worst sort of, moments of violence that this world has seen. And in that sense, Gandhi's walking tours were acts of love, acts of tremendous love. So much energy in that, 75-year-old man to actually, walk through these rickety bridges, walk through these very narrow lanes. Sometimes these kids coming and, shitting on his path, trying to dissuade him from walking. But nothing can dissuade Gandhi. Nothing can dissuade Gandhi, not because he has this mission of quelling the violence, but also because, he's not walking with hatred in his head or in his heart. He's not traveling and moving with any kind of hatred. Because, there is this extreme energy that one finds and feels in Gandhi when one, reads about him and reads him, And I think this is not something very, very vague, which we cannot relate to. It is not like that. I think whenever we think of or we read about, say a certain episode of hatred, where somebody has hate somebody or somebody has killed somebody or said nasty things, if we are disturbed by it, where is that disturbance coming from? So we are actually, at heart and even in our minds, we are people who carry very, strong notions and sense of love. The whole point of hatred, of course, is to somehow, curb or bury that very strong sense of love that we carry in us. And as history has proven and shown us very, time and again, very unfortunately, that it is always possible for hatred or for any logic or discourse or narrative of hatred to actually force people to bury or curb this instinct of love within them and then go all out for hatred. But this actually does not, I think, remain forever. This is not the most abiding thing in human history. But then again, I'm also pessimist in many ways. So I think that, even though I'm saying this, I also know that one of the big problems of history that we haven't been able to overcome is this failure to, overcome these, these hateful instincts, and also to constantly, find resources of love to challenge it. Yes, at every moment, people have done it. But then again, it becomes so overwhelming that so many people fall for it and keep falling for it again and again. So that's a trouble. That's a problem we haven't been able to overcome. And I think that is precisely why, we write books and we talk about these things, precisely because the battle against history and the history of hatred hasn't been won yet.
No, I think that's what I wanted. take this next question, which is on the day of Gandhi's assassination, which is on 30th January 1948. Gandhi was 10 minutes late to his evening prayer meeting. You write that he was 10 minutes late for his death. So, how do we actually see the moment of Gandhi's death? Is it a moment of vindication for the Hindu community, as Godse would want us to look at it?
Godse was an imbecile, and he managed to inflict and implant that sort of sentiment, in the psyche of people who remain, uh, anti-Gandhi. He gave voice, and he also produced that act, which showcased a certain kind of deep historical animosity, political animosity against, the figure of Gandhi and, his ethic of struggle against, forces of wrong and forces of hatred. So if that sentiment lives in some people, well, you can say, Godse, vindicates that sort of thing, or he makes that sort of thing, exist in the world as such. But I think for a large number of people then, and even for a large number of people now, not just in India, but in the world, that moment is a tragic moment, because that moment unleashed a sense of mourning, which is not just simply for a person, because Gandhi was not just a person. People like Gandhi are not just, flesh and blood people. They are also specters. They are, they are figures who are more than just being, an individual person. And so that spirit, that possibility, that specter that Gandhi was, is something that Gandhi still is. And like I say, you can't kill a specter. You can kill a person, but you can't kill a specter. So what Godse managed to kill was a person, but what he couldn't manage to kill was the specter. And that specter, keeps haunting the world precisely because it had something very powerful to say. And for me, this whole idea of bringing in the notion of time at the end of the book and saying that, he was always, this punctual person, wanted to be punctual in his prayer meeting, and yet he was delayed, and he was really, cribbing about it, and then finally he died. For me, the meaning of that moment lies in the fact that here was somebody who was always, being punctual, had a sense of punctuality towards talking about, love, and talking about, that rapprochement between people. But finally, what, seems now in retrospect was a delay, of his punctual life. That delay was actually in retrospect caused, it seems, by his killing, by his death. So his death actually comes to, to sort of hit at that punctuality that he was very serious about. And so then how do we see this question that how the, death as an interruption of life, and which, then creates this sort of rupture between, your life and what is punctual and all of that, that, you want to be there, you want to be on stage, You want to listen to people who are waiting to tell you something. So death comes and interrupts that dialogue. So for me, death in Gandhi's case comes as an interruption to the dialogue that he was having with people. And that dialogue, where Gandhi always wanted to be punctual, about the dialogue, but death comes and, sort of gives it a different color.
That was a very prolific way of looking at that specific event. My last question, which is what lessons does Gandhi hold for our current times? I mean, and what is the importance of this history of the Gandhi's last phase, which we have spoken about in detail, hold for our contemporary times?
I would say to this question, Rishwant, that more than, spending too much time about, the complexities and nitty-gritties of, what Gandhi was actually meaning, what exactly Gandhi meant by this and that, what was his, political theory, political philosophy, and all of that. More than all of this, and debates around all of this, in our conferences, what we do need to, I think, look at and emphasize more on, it's not Gandhi, the mere thinker alone, but Gandhi, the practitioner, that what was Gandhi practicing. And I think today's politics, at least the secular kind of politics, would do better, to actually, pay attention to that sort of Gandhian practice of politics, because, the thinking and all of that, can be debated and discussed. But there are moments in a country's history where politics is no longer a thing of discussion and debate. It is also about something to be lived and encountered and to be practiced right there, in the middle of the street, right when you talk to people. Gandhi showed that, you need to listen a lot to people. That's something I've emphasized. And as much as to engage in a dialogue with people. It is also important to walk a lot. It is also important to counter and encounter hatred, not by really always, calling names in return, but to actually do something different, to have the courage to, to invent and create a language of love, a politics of love, which can actually, um, deal with any sort of politics of hatred. That, I think, in my understanding, would be what Gandhi, Gandhi's relevance, in our times, because he's actually shown that, you don't need to really think too much in order to go out, simply and make that bold gesture that, look, I'm not scared of people. I'm not scared of you. You are my people and I belong to you. And whatever people may, define me as, describe me as, whatever propaganda is there in the world about me, but I would still wish and want to be here facing you and talking to you and listening to you and, telling you things that I believe in.
Manash Firaq, thank you so much for this really awe-inspiring, and there are so many new ways of thinking about the events and the sayings of Mahatma Gandhi itself, which you have exposed with your work and this specific conversation. And thank you so much for your patience and your wisdom.
Thank you, Rishwans, for having me. And this was really great, a really good, thinking and dialogic session that we have had. Thank you so much.